Hi guys, it's Rachel. So this is a VR to Simon over at the Hermit's Cave. It's a fun tag called Tarot Journey Through Decks. And there's just a few prompts, which I will try to follow to the best of my ability. And they are as follows. There's the beginning, the deck that started it all for you, the deepening, decks that helped you grow, learn, or deepen your practice, the now, the decks that currently resonate with you the most, and the milestones, any other decks that marked significant points in your tarot journey. So I'm going to begin with the beginning, my first experiences with the tarot. So I can't remember when I first saw or learned of divination through decks. I really can't remember. But when I was, I don't know, maybe 18, 19, I had a couple of friends who read tarot decks and were following a new path of witchcraft, which I was not into at all. All of these things would have been totally not allowed in my house at all. And then when I was in college with a couple of these good friends, after school, we would frequent this metaphysical shop. It was called the Flying Broomstick. And I loved going there, but for whatever reason, it didn't pique my interest. I just liked being with my friends, liked the people that owned the shop, the other people who frequented it, and we were all good friends. There was a psychic reader there, and we were really close to her. I remember going to a couple of parties at her house. She gave me some readings. One was a past life reading. One was just, a general one. And I remember her saying to me, why don't you trust me? Why won't you trust me? And it wasn't out of any disrespect for her. And she didn't mean any disrespect to me either. But she sensed that skepticism from me. And I remember at one point she had said to us, like my group of friends, she pointed at me and she was like, "This one scares me." And she meant it in a good way. She and my other friends, for whatever reason, I can't remember why, they all thought that I had some clairvoyancy and that if I were to develop my psychic abilities, I would be a really powerful witch. But you would think being surrounded by all those decks every day, being the collector that I am now, it would have piqued my interest to maybe buy one. But nope, not at all. I do remember at one point coming home late at night from the shop. Maybe we'd gone to the movies afterwards, but in those days I remembered I kept seeing dogs everywhere in my dreams and just in my daily life. Like, my friends went to drop me off at my house and there was this black dog on the sidewalk by itself, no one around. And my girlfriend was like, I think that dog is interested in you. And then I went to open the door and she's like, no, don't. I don't feel comfortable. She's like, I think that dog wants something from you. And we waited a while and it was just staring at me. It was really eerie. And eventually I went in the house and didn't think about it. But yeah, I kept seeing black dogs in my dreams. And I also remember, although I was very skeptical, it was just my upbringing. I grew up in a Christian household. We weren't very conservative or anything, but I was always taught that, you're to stay away from any sort of witchcraft. And I never told my mother that one of my best friends was a witch. My mother loved her, by the way. Loved her. She had no idea. But I remember I would go to my girlfriend's house and I would get readings from her because I was usually really upset over some boy. And she gave me readings with, you know, the typical Rider-Waite-Smith deck in the yellow box, the US Games. I actually don't have that deck, believe it or not. I don't have the Rider-Waite-Smith with the plaid backs that everybody has. I don't know why. So I'm going to just show you this edition here. I love this deck. I don't remember the publisher. Siren Imports. It's a fun, brightly colored Rider-Waite with the linen finish. Anyway, I do remember my girlfriend giving me readings with this deck. And I was going through this breakup with a long-term boyfriend, and I still to this day remember the reading she gave me with this deck. And it was, you know, a typical question. Are we going to get back together? And my friend was so sweet. And you could say she was biased because she knew me so well. But basically she told me, she was like, I think it's possible you could get back together, but it's not a good thing right now. You both have some growing to do. And yeah, we did end up getting back together. But you know what? My friend was right. She was right about everything she said in that reading. She was right. Even though I am very thankful for the daughter that came from that relationship. Love her to death. Another deck that I remember my friend having was the Vampire Tarot by Natalie Hertz. And I want to say she got rid of this deck, perhaps. I should ask her if she still has it. But I remember her giving all of us readings with this deck at her house. And she wasn't happy with what the cards were telling her. And at one point, she's like, I don't like this deck. It's being mean to everyone. I think maybe I should get rid of it. Anyway, this is a deck that I've only had for a year or so. I had to get it because it just reminds me of my friend. And I love vampire decks. But yeah, I was such a hypocrite. I wasn't going to buy cards, read cards, but I was totally okay with people giving me readings. And it was usually a relationship reading. I was so stupid about boys. So it wasn't until I think I was, I don't know how old, but I had already become a mother, and my sister had come to visit me. At this point, I was living in New England, and she told me that, she kind of whispered to me, she's like, when we go to Salem, she's like, I kind of want to buy a tarot deck. And I was like, oh, really? And she's like, yeah, but don't say anything. Don't say anything to Mom. I'm like, no, of course not. And she told me there was this video game she'd been playing that was based on the tarot. So it really piqued her interest. She was really intrigued by the archetypes and everything. So we went to Salem, and I remember we went into this shop that I still frequent. It's one of my favorite shops. It's called Omen. And she looked at the decks there, and she was really attracted to the Hermetic Tarot. So I bought it for her. And she's like, well, that's great because I heard your first deck is supposed to be purchased by somebody else. And she just really loved this artwork. So I'll just show you a few cards. You're probably all very familiar with this deck. It's a beautiful deck. But she didn't end up keeping it. She came into my room late that night and she was all paranoid, freaking out. She's like, I think I did something wrong. I can't sleep, and I'm worried that I invited something into your house because I bought a tarot deck. And I'm like, no, no. It's okay. It's okay. Like, it's just a pack of cards. Anyway, my mom told me recently on the phone that she found this deck. So my mom didn't throw it out. And she asked me if I wanted it if my sister didn't. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And while we were at that shop, I decided that I wanted to get a deck too. So my sister's like, no, let me buy it. Let me buy it. And I didn't want her to spend the same amount that I had on her deck. So I decided to choose a mini, something that was very inexpensive. So for $10, it's in this little box because I beat up the other box it came in. And it's funny because this box was also given to me by my sister. I chose the Harmonious Mini. And this still has like the little white book. So this was my first deck. It's so tiny. I have the full-size version now. But anyway, my sister had gone home, and I remembered, I don't know what I did with this deck. I would just sort of admire the images and kind of read through this little tiny book. And I do remember one night, date night with my husband, we were sitting at this bar by the beach, and we were in this little outdoor section, like a little patio, and we weren't talking really. So I pulled this deck out of my purse, and I was just sort of, kind of shuffling it. And I remember my husband side-eyed me, and his eyes got really big, and he's like, you're not like getting into that stuff, are you? And I don't remember what I said to him, but he was really freaked out by it. But I think my response was something like, no, not really. Just I'm kind of intrigued. Maybe it will help loosen me up, gain some inspiration for some art, because I was a new mother and it was hard for me to loosen up. Anyhow, I didn't think that I was ever going to really learn anything about this for whatever reason, but it piqued my interest enough to decide I want a deck, like a bigger deck, because this is so small. So I remember browsing online for hours. I wanted to buy one tarot deck, and I finally settled on the Morgan Greer. And see how I like tape this box all up. So I often think of this deck really as my first. Yeah, I edged it many years later. I wasn't into Pamela Coleman Smith's art, but I really loved this. It was very, 70s, 80s to me. Loved the colors. What's funny is that although I didn't know anything about tarot in those days, I would shuffle the deck most days and draw some cards. And almost every single day, I drew this card. Every day. It was uncanny. And I just talked about this in my previous video, actually. But I really connected with this card. And I found it very, very beautiful. It's still one of my very favorite cards. I love like the slate, blue, gray sky, and the ruins in the background. And what it said to me was that I was obviously extremely homesick. I missed my family and friends back in Buffalo, New York. And it even inspired me enough to create some art. Hang on a second. So I was experimenting with colored pencils, a medium I hadn't really worked with before, and I can't get this all in the shot. But I drew this, and you can see I used some of the flowers from the Morgan Greer as references here, but it's a self-portrait. And to me, it said I was very lonely, but I wanted somebody to see me, right? But it was really inspired by the symbolism of the cards, especially the Fool. But my husband made fun of this, right? I remember somehow I saw myself as the Page of Cups, even though, like I said, I didn't know anything about tarot. What I would do with this deck is I would flip through it when I decided I wanted to be creative, because my premise in using it was to shed my inhibitions, and draw from them, whether they were references for things to draw or just inspiration, literary inspiration, drawing on the archetypes and things, to get back into my writing and my visual art. So I would select cards that inspired me, and I would lay them out on my art table with shells and rocks that I found at the beach and on hikes. And I was kind of creating an altar without realizing it. This was one of my favorite cards. This one. What else? Loved this, the Eight of Cups. The Hermit, I adored. Queen of Swords. Two of Swords. I loved this, Five of Swords. The Ace of Pentacles was one. The Three of Pentacles. The Tower was probably my first favorite card. I always had that on my altar. Loved the Three of Cups. The King of Cups, I had a problem with. Every time I saw this card or got it, he rubbed me the wrong way. What's really interesting about this is that many years later, when I was learning more about astrology and everything, I discovered that my husband was a King of Cups. And based on his birth, when he was born, we're all assigned a court card. And in those days, the reason that I didn't like this guy was because he reminded me of my husband. That should have been a giant red flag, but I was just not seeing it. Loved the Death card. And I love the Moon. I don't know where it went. And I remember my daughter was flipping through this deck, and she showed me this, and she's like, this is mommy, and this is daddy. And I hadn't said anything to her about how I saw myself as the page or how I saw her father as the King of Cups. Really uncanny. So there's one other deck that I bought in those very early days, like probably a week after I bought the Morgan Greer's. I got the Legend, the Arthurian Tarot by Anna Marie Ferguson, because I wanted a deck that was, I wanted the deck that drew from the Arthurian legends, because I loved King Arthur, and I still do. And I just learned recently this deck is long out of print. It's beautiful. I never really read with it too much. One of the reasons being I didn't really read my cards much for divination in those days. But it was always kind of difficult for me to see these cards, because the art is beautiful, but it's really tiny, watercolor. It sort of becomes washed out, but I still love this deck. Love it. Look at Arthur. And the book is really good. I read that in its entirety. And what I love about it is it's a really good breakdown, a concise synopsis of the myths. But she gives you the retellings through the ages. So, for example, with Guinevere, you see how there was more of a sympathetic light cast upon her in the earlier myths, the pre-Christian myths. But, I'll say, there's Guinevere at the stake. The Christian retellings, which we're all probably much more familiar with, they make for some interesting pathos, for sure. Things we can all relate to and get frustrated by. And I remember my boyfriend, he's like, what's this King Arthur? Like, why are you watching King Arthur? And he's like, what's the significance or something? Because I had said something that made him ask that question. And I'm like, King Arthur is like my godfather. He's like the godfather. And he's like, oh, yeah, okay, I get that now. Because he's like one of those goons that loves the godfather. And, all these guys, they're always, referencing it and quoting from it and finding applicable life lessons. And I'm like, yeah, King Arthur, it's like the godfather. He's like, oh, I get it now. Okay. So for some years, those were the only decks I had. The Morgan Greer, the Arthurian, and the Harmonious Mini. And at some point, it was like some years later, I decided that I wanted another deck. Now, what was happening was that I was going through some really, really difficult times, a divorce. My partner was also going through a divorce, and his ex did not make it easy. So really, really trying times. And I was on the phone with my mother, and she's like, well, why don't you write? Why don't you draw? Why don't you play the piano? Why don't you do some of the things that take your mind off of, everything that's going on? And she's like, when you were living in New Hampshire, you went through this creative spell, and why don't you try to find a way to get back into that? And somehow it came up that I had mentioned to her, aside from the music that I'd been listening to in those days and the books that opened up my world to, this path of self-discovery and agency, I had mentioned something about the tarot deck and sort of drawing references from them from my art. And I was like, I know you don't want to hear about that. I know how you feel about that. Because mind you, I didn't mention this earlier, but at one point when my mom was visiting me, we were in a museum. We were in, I think we were in the Peabody, Essex in Salem. And somehow it came up. I don't remember if my sister mentioned it or my daughter, but it was somehow mentioned that I had a couple of tarot decks. And my mom, who I was always very close to and still am, and I thought I knew her, there was this wall, this taboo, this bias, and she was so upset. She got so mad at me that she actually looked at me and she said, "You're not my daughter." And she walked away. And I was crying, and I was like, Mom, what? It was so upsetting. Yeah, that's how strongly she felt about it. And she quoted that silly line from the Bible, about not suffering witches to live and all of that. Regardless of that, a few years later, I mentioned to her how the tarot was one of the inspirations in the past that brought about all that art. And she said, well, you know what? She's like, why don't you pick up your decks again? I think you should go get one and bring out some cards. And I did. And from that point on, actually, I started using my cards every day. And I started recording my readings. And one of the books that I was reading was this Tarot Handbook by Rachel Pollack. Now, I had bought this back when I got the Morgan Greer, and I had read through it, but I don't remember if I'd read through the whole thing, and I don't remember how much I really, retained. But I brought this back out again and was reading it, and I found myself actually wanting to learn for the first time, as I hadn't done when I first owned my decks. And I got another book, and it's Mary K. Greer's Tarot for Yourself. And I picked up this used copy, and I thought it was really cool because this edition was printed in 1984, and that's the year I was born. And I started, here's the Morgan Greer here. I started doing all of the prompts in here. You can see how I wrote in it. I did almost all of the exercises. And that's where I got the idea to record my readings every day with a coinciding color chart for the minors and major cards that I was drawing, and to see how many cups I was getting each month, and wands, and so on and so on. But around this time, I found myself wanting to get another deck, and I got the Aquarian Tarot in a tin. Not really a big surprise, same era as the Morgan Greer. Love the 70s. So I'll just show this really quick. But I didn't own the deck very long before I discovered that what I really wanted and was missing was an actual Rider-Waite-Smith deck. I think it was a result of becoming familiarized with the images in the Rachel Pollack book. So this was my first Rider-Waite-Smith deck, the borderless Centennial Edition. And I found that, you know, I was wrong. There's some additional examples of Pixie's art. So beautiful. And I found out too, I learned a long time ago that when she did her art, she used the same method that I did, which I thought everybody did this. I thought everyone needs to listen to music to create art, to go into some trance and draw what you see or paint what you see or write what you see. But I guess not. But anyway, that's what she did, and that's how I've always created. Anyhow, I loved this borderless edition. So I discovered I was wrong. I actually do really love this art. I haven't actually used this deck for some time. And then around the same time, I was like, okay, I don't need any more decks. I think I have 5 now. That's way too much. But I wanted something different. I wanted something that was really going to help me like shed those inhibitions and everything. I wanted an art deck. And I looked at a ton. And I finally settled on the Japaridzi. I was blown away by this deck. And I remember reading that the artist, Nino Japaridzi, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, she had no prior knowledge to the tarot. So I really liked that. And although I wasn't sure about some of the court cards, like with the clowns, when I was looking at the images online, I said to myself, you know, she's the creator of the deck, not me. Maybe I'll allow her voice to speak for itself and see what it tells me. And so I found myself, you know, using this deck and reading it sort of on a more intuitive level, which is maybe what I was probably doing with the Morgan Greer back in the day, because I wasn't really reading or learning about cards or the history or anything. I got this Page of Swords constantly. The Page of Swords was my stalker card for like a couple of years. Love this 8 of Cups. And then, oh, love this Sun. And this Tower. This just reminds me of Stravinsky for some reason. The Devil. I love that there are bats in here. Like, oh, look at the bat. Yeah. Really special deck. I experienced a disconnect with it for a time. Not enough to try to part with it. Out of all of the decks I own, and there's a lot, I think I've only gotten rid of maybe 2-3 decks. But then I was going through an even more difficult time. I found myself connecting with it again. So those were, you know, my first decks. So the Deepening, decks that helped you grow, learn, or deepen your practice. At some point, I don't know, I discovered that I was, after all, interested in Marseille, and the Yov Ben Dov was my first Marseille, and I had the book, although I actually didn't read it until some years later. And I can't say really what I learned at the time through this new system to me. But it did help me understand that I was in this for the long haul. I wasn't afraid to use it anymore. And although I didn't think that I was going to be like a professional tarot reader or anything, it was definitely a part of my daily practice and was having a major influence on my life and my art. And I discovered I loved Marseille so much that I wanted a facsimile, and this was the Marseille deck for me. And I got this as a gift from my boyfriend, and it's still one of my favorites, the Claude Burdel 1751 by Yves Renaud. This is a beautiful deck. I talk about this frequently enough. My favorite Queen of Wands. So this video is probably Oh yeah, already 30 minutes in. I didn't think this was going to be so long. But yeah, I was in it for the long haul. I love this Ace of Cups, this Phoenix or whatever it is rising from the ashes. And this looks like a kingdom that I want to enter. Just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. One of the most gorgeous Marseille decks. So what are some more decks for the deepening? Okay. Tarot of the Holy Light. I'll just show this really quick. This was one of the decks that I was the most excited for. When I saved my money up and I knew that this deck was coming in the mail, I was so giddy. I would watch walkthroughs of this every night. So yeah, at this point, obviously, I was watching Tarot Tube. I didn't have a channel. I actually wasn't even subscribed to anyone. This was back in like 2017. And I didn't comment. I was incredibly shy. I didn't think I was ever going to have a channel. But my boyfriend, he told me, I told him, I was like, I'm thinking about it. And he's like, I think you should do it. I think you should go for it. You know a lot of stuff. You're interesting. And I think people will like you. And I did it because I wanted to meet people and have fun conversations. Anyway, I'm not even really talking about this deck at all, but I became very interested in alchemy and the, what was this system? The continental system. I had a couple of Robert M. Place decks at this point, and I was reading books on tarot history. And this has one of the best guidebooks ever. I remember reading about the Five of Cups in here, which, as I said, was my stalker card for years. And it was sort of life-changing. And then things got like really, really ugly, and I was displaced from my home for a few months. Really difficult times. And I picked up the Osho Zen. Now, this is a deck that I recommend to anyone. If you don't have it and you're planning on getting it, please, please, please please read the guidebook, because even though, yes, you can read this intuitively, the guidebook is really going to enhance your experience with this deck, especially if you have healing to do or you're going through some trauma, as I was. For example, this card here, that's so funny that this is on the top. Slowing down. Now, I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think this is the Knight of Pentacles. I remember drawing this card in a reading, and when I read the explanation in the guidebook, it talked all about how your home is always with you. You carry your home with you. And it was so poignant to me in my situation, being displaced from my home, not knowing what the next day brought. Very happy to not be homeless, but it felt sort of that way. I felt powerless. And I was also separated from the person that I loved, my partner. Anyway, this deck was so powerful and life-changing that I haven't used this deck since those days. I haven't been able to part with it because I love it. I love this card. But I could see myself giving it to a friend if they really needed it, really, really needed something to get them through the difficult times. And also around that time, I don't remember how it happened, but while I was displaced from my home, I happened upon the Tabula Mundi by M.M. Moline. Now, at this time, I didn't have any Thoth decks. I'd seen it. It was a bit daunting to me. I wasn't really afraid of it. Oh, the Deccan cards are all here. But there was something about this that I couldn't get this deck out of my head. I remember being in the shower and I kept seeing the colors. It was the colors. And Moline is like an expert on the Golden Dawn color scale. Love this Queen of Wands. This isn't the edition I had in those days, by the way. This is the second edition that I have with the silver foiling. But of course, from there, this was the gateway to the Rosetta, also by Moline, and this is a Thoth clone. This was her first deck. So I knew in those days there were lots of people who could not stand Crowley, and but however, they loved this deck. They loved the softness of these images, even though, I mean, look, it's a Thoth clone. They liked the, I don't know, the feminine touch, even though it was painted by Lady Frida Harris, the Thoth deck, under the direction of Crowley. All of the art that you see in that deck was created under his direction. And she often had to go back to the drawing board. She'd show him something and he's like, it's not quite right. It's not quite what I meant. So I didn't think that I was going to get the Thoth deck or the Book of Thoth or any of that. By the way, the guidebook for the Rosetta, the Book of Seshat, is really great, especially for beginners, or even if you just want to learn more about astrology and how the cards all coincide with the planets and everything, and the zodiac. This really does a good job of explaining it all. And the Thoth system in general is good for that. Anyway, I was listening to the podcast, and yeah, I would listen to the podcast every day while I was crocheting. I was crocheting little tarot bags and this Afghan for my daughter that she had commissioned, and really loving the podcast. So of course it happened that I was going to get a Thoth deck. And my first, this was a little bag I crocheted for it, was just this little US Games guy. And you all know it, so I'm not going to really show that one. I'll show the larger edition. But I was blown away. I was blown away with the images and reading through the meanings in the little white book. I didn't even have the Book of Thoth at the time. But I remembered one day, and I was still displaced from my home. I was sitting in my Pabazon chair that I brought from my apartment, and oh, here it is. I was just shuffling through the deck. I wasn't even doing a reading. I was just looking at all of the images. And I happened upon the Six of Swords, and I just stared at this for the longest time. And I, without even understanding what it meant, I felt this calm sweep over me. And it was sort of like, I don't know, I sort of felt like my spirit was hovering above my body. And then at some point, I don't remember when I got the Book of Thoth. I think it might have been after, I think it was shortly after I came back home, after the divorce and everything was finalized, and I got my first copy of the Book of Thoth. My first copy was actually really badly bootlegged, so I was lucky enough to find this beautiful vintage copy for a really nice price. And I read through the whole thing, and my mind was just blown. And I was like, wow, okay, so this blends, to me it was very poetic, and it was like high literature. I just love the way that he writes. You can go into a trance reading his description of the cards and the Kabbalah and everything. It was just mind-blowing. This was really life-changing. I'm not going to get into it too much because this video is a lot longer than I intended it to be. But another deck that was a deepening deck or a milestone. I'm kind of blending milestones and the deepening together. Side by side is the Tarot of Vampires. And this is a Thoth deck as well. And I think I owned this one before I owned the Thoth deck. But I don't have to explain the guidebook and how amazing it is. I don't know why I'm flipping through it like that. But this card here, the Six of Swords, was a card that I hadn't really quite understood yet. But again, I just talked about this in my previous video, so sorry to repeat myself, but I remember being a passenger at night in this car, and I was going through this situation that was so stressful. It was just impossible to escape from it. And I closed my eyes to try to go into some sort of meditative state. And I saw the image of this card from this deck. It just came to me. And somehow that's when the message became clear to me. That's when the meaning of this card clicked for me. And it's, you know, perfect objectivity, the sort of objectivity that can help you rise above any situation at hand. However, it's objectivity blended with morality, which is really important because that keeps you human and grounded. And there was another card too. I remember being a magician. Yeah. For whatever reason, for the longest time, I don't know why, for years, I didn't understand the magician. He was just a card I didn't connect with, right? I was at this bar one night, my boyfriend, and everybody around me was engaged in conversation, and I wasn't. I wasn't a part of it. I was far, far away. Love this card too. And somehow, I remember I was just like kind of staring at the floor and thinking really heavily on something when I saw this in my mind, this particular magician from this deck, which by the way was not my favorite magician, but somehow that's when the meaning clicked for me. Well, not quite the meaning, but it was like this. I was like, oh, I know why it is I never get the magician in my readings, because mind you, I was recording my readings every day in a notebook, and I noticed the magician was missing. I'm like, the reason I never draw the magician in my readings is because magic, this is what's missing in my life, this belief in myself. And from then on out, I started working on that. Amazing and life-changing. And I also discovered around that time when I got the Thoth that, let's just face it, I'm a collector. This was my first Il Meneghello deck, the Vaquetta. I think that's how you pronounce it. I had been looking at this deck for the longest time and was so thrilled to welcome it into my collection. And still in those days, I was telling myself, I'm only going to get decks that really deepen, enhance my practice. Did I really think that this did that? No, this might have been the first deck that I had to admit wasn't going to really enhance my practice. It wasn't any new system or anything, but it was one of the first decks that I ever fell in love with and salivated over. So that was sort of like a milestone. And also, I wanted to mention, a few years ago, I went through another crisis in my life. And I never thought that I was going to use spells. But I started playing with this Tarot Spells book by Janina Renee. And what happened was, I've mentioned this in another video, my partner, my long-term partner, woke up one morning, it was awful, and he was like, Rachel, I can't see. I can't see. And yeah, he suffered something called optic neuropathy, and we've adjusted to it. He's not blind, but he was declared legally blind, and it was a huge life change, and it was very much like a death. I was so upset over it. I remember being in the shower one night and praying. I was like, let it happen to me instead. Like, let him have his vision and just do that to me instead. It was it was just so devastating that I found myself doing spells with the book, not because I thought that it was going to, bring his sight back, But I noticed him falling into this depression, and he wasn't doing anything. He wasn't moving. He wasn't getting up off the couch. It was very bad. And I remember doing a spell that's supposed to help bring motivation. And so I did it. I brought out the appropriate colors and the candles and everything, and I focused, my intent. I had one of his objects, a favorite watch. You know what's funny? The next morning, he told me, he came up to me, he's like, darling, he's like, I don't know why, but I woke up feeling so great this morning. I took the trash out, I did the dishes, I vacuumed, and I feel great. And maybe it was just a coincidence, but the deck that I was using for the spell work was the Elemental Power Tarot. I think Giselle actually showed this maybe in this tag, and I was thrilled because I never see this deck. But I love this, and I thought it was perfect for the spell work and for journeying, and it's very pippish. I don't mind pips at all, but especially with the majors, they're just beautiful cards to journey into. And I remembered, yeah, it was a fun practice. I did that for a while, for a few months. I would work with this deck. I would do some astral traveling, and sometimes I would work from the Tarot Spell Book by Janina Renee. And yeah, that was a milestone because I didn't realize you could use the cards in that way. But okay, I'm going to try to wrap this up. The decks that currently resonate with you the most. So I'm all over the place. I'm not in the middle of any sort of big tarot study, and I would love to be, because there's so many books that I own that I still have to read, and so many systems that I want to explore, and I have Marseille books that I have to read, and just so many things. But right now what I've been doing is I have just been using decks that coincide with the reading that I'm doing, or the music I'm listening to, or whatever is inspiring me. So for example, I won't go on about this too much because you see it all the time, but the Robert M. Place Vampire deck. This is a deck that I've been using a lot since November because of the Gothlit November tag that I created with my friend Bailey. And now I'm doing Candy's Fanguary. And I'm rereading the guidebook because it's fascinating. And Bram Stoker was a friend of Pixies. So it all ties in together. And I love how he goes on about, the animus being the driving force behind the vampire myth. And another deck that I've been using a lot is the Gothic Literature Tarot. This has some of the best cardstock on the planet. So yeah, lately I haven't really been using some of my beloved decks that you see all the time. Like I haven't been using my Thoth as much. I haven't been using my Marseille as much, because right now this is where I'm at, is Gothic Literature. Oh, love this deck. It's so beautiful. Another one is tried and true favorite is the Yonasi Yaus. This is the latest edition. This is a deck that I use all the time. Has been a beloved for quite some time. I own like 4 editions of this. This is a Marseille-based deck, if I didn't mention that already. And it's always been a very intuitive reader for me, and it still is. And it's somehow a deck that I can just really learn a lot from. And her write-up on the cards is really smart. And it's really thought-provoking. Another deck that I've been using a lot is the Ancient Egyptian Tarot by Clive Barrett. I think this is out of print, like the Vampire Tarot, but yeah. I've been feeling the call lately, which I have quite a few Egyptian decks, but I've just been feeling the pull. I've just been using decks that I see, like, like in my mind's eye, or sometimes I'm taking a shower and I'll think of a deck that I have and I'm like, yeah, I think I need to be using that deck. This is a gorgeous deck. And this has sort of been my practice since I decided to go with my intuition regarding the reading that I'm doing, like the books. Like, I've always been an avid reader. I've always been an avid reader, but I think the reason why the tarot is so tied into it lately is because recently my reading for the first time is a very collective thing. It's a group thing. Before it was always solitary. I was always just reading books by myself. I wasn't in any book clubs or anything, but with the tag that my friend and I created, and then Candy's tag, it's become more of a group activity, and it's so much fun watching everybody's videos and seeing all of the inspiration that everyone is finding through these books. And then this is my latest acquisition, the Tarot Epinal. I love this deck. I have the Patrick Valenza facsimile edition. Look at these backs. And this is, like, I think it's actually redrawn. This is an edition from the 70s. I forget what year. I'm pretty sure it's the late 70s, though. And I love it. And I don't know. I don't know what to say, but I love the Epinal Tarot. This is just a favorite of mine. And then another deck that I've just sort of been playing with at night, not really doing heavy readings with, maybe just one card at a time, is thanks to Giselle. And it's Aquaria, the Magician's deck. And it's funny because I'd been thinking about this deck, and then all of a sudden Giselle showed it in a collection of dark decks. And then she did a walkthrough of it. And I was like, okay, I'm listening to my intuition again. I think all the signs are pointing to me using this deck and working with this deck in a way that maybe I haven't with some of my others. And the dreams that I've been having, I'm not even going to go into it. But wow, they're all telling me that this thing that I've been thinking about doing for some time and haven't been, I need to do it. So, look how beautiful. I've had this deck for some time. I've had it for a while, and I didn't think it was the time yet to use it, because there's the right time for everything. But anyway, that's where I'm at right now. I mean, it's kind of all over the place, but really my practice is currently inspired by my reading and all that jazz. So anyhow, if you're still here, thank you so much for watching this. I went on a little bit longer than I intended to, but this was fun. Again, thank you, Simon, for creating this fun community tag. I've been wanting to make a video like this for some time, and this was perfect. These were the perfect prompts. Loved it. I've loved all the videos that I've watched so far, and I hope to see more from you guys. So, okay, that'll be it. Thanks for watching. Bye.